Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and all the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live. And right now we're building great things in Providence, and I want you to come downtown and see what's here because it's amazing how the city is changing. But behind the scenes, a lot of people work hard on issues that we don't even think about, most of us, in our daily life. And today I've invited 4 poets who are here from Ocean State Poets, and they'll tell you a little bit about that organization. And they're here because for 9 years, they have gone every other week to men's medium security prison and talked with men about poetry and helped them to express themselves and also listen to each other. A very, very important fact of the behind-the-scenes basic life of Rhode Island. I think it's very commendable, and I'm so glad you're all here, and I'm so impressed with the work that you've done. Today we have Margie Flanders, who's here, Larry Cripps, Cato Kula, and Bill Carpenter, who you might recognize as one of our faithful cameramen as well. And I welcome you here because it's so good to give understanding of what you've all done. And so I would like to welcome you and ask you to tell me how you ever got involved in this in the first place. What happened that made you think you could give that much time? I didn't multiply all the years and the hours, but it's a lot of hours.
Well, I've always been interested in prison work, and when we get involved in the Ocean State Poets, you know, I'd worked in the prison environment in the past. I'd worked through the Office of Rehabilitation Services, and served the prison. So there was an interest there from the get-go. And yeah, it's one of those things where when I worked there, I thought I had a pretty good relationship with the guys. So I felt like it was an environment where I could work. The other reason I was interested in working out there is I felt like if it weren't for a few people in my life, I could have been out there. That I really was something, I was kind of a troubled teenager, trouble with authority, the whole thing. So it wasn't inconceivable to me that I could have been behind bars at some point in my life. Luckily, it didn't happen. Mostly because I didn't get caught.
Margie, how about you?
Thank you for having us, by the way. It's work that's dear to our hearts, and we love to talk about it and think about it. And I didn't have any experience in the field, but I believe in poetry, and I particularly believe in people getting together and sharing poetry. And we never set out to have it be a class. It really was a workshop, and that was an important part of our sort of mission, was to make it feel like we were all in it together.
Larry, how about you?
Way back when I was in my early 20s, I did have a professional position in a prison, teaching prisoners from minimum security in Massachusetts. And that was a great experience for me. So when this came up in OSP, it not only fulfilled our mission of providing poetry to people who might otherwise not have it, I thought it was a great opportunity to really be in the prison and be another community.
Impressive. Kate?
Well, I was a transplant to Rhode Island it's about 14 years ago now, and in my career I've gone through a lot of social service, worked with a lot of social service agencies, and one of my favorites was a juvenile detention facility where I really got to know the youth who were there and the amazing amount of creativity they had. So I was pretty happy when I came to Rhode Island and found a group at that time called Power to the Poets, which was founded by Rose Pearson
Yes.
and Lisa Starr. And many of our poets now are continuing from that original group. And I joined it because I really love the mission for the Ocean State Poets, to bring poetry to places where you may not ordinarily find it. And so then I realized that the prison had already been set up, and I had to go through a rather intense interview with one of our poet friends who asked my credentials as far as poetry is concerned in a very gentle way. It was, and then as the more we talked, she said, "I think you might enjoy the ACI." So, prophetess that she was, I loved the ACI. I love my colleagues, the outsiders, as they're called, and the guys who are inside. And it's been a wonderful experience, kind of like on a road that was already set.
I'd like you to start by reading one of the poems that you all wrote together, or that Margie edited, essentially, and you all wrote together. Please read Why We Write.
And I might say this was something that the men and I and the group wrote together. Why we write. Because poetry is a long black wool scarf wrapped 8 times around our necks.
Because poetry is the wind biting our jackets by the frozen bay we fall into, and are then saved by mermaids who leave us shivering and thanking heaven.
When poetry comes to town, it carries a small cab full of letters and rotten fruit, with worms as strong and dirty as the sorrows of this year's hell.
We wash our hands, pick up our heads, lean away from the crushed rock of silence, and then write.
One poem closes our eyes like a setting sun strung with rosary beads, cold and restless. Another poem is blood flowing, holding a cleaver in its scarred hand.
The fist of one poem hits the side of the house, and another stained glass shattering our souls.
We write because poetry rocks in a chair while shingles fly across the lawn and overgrowth cuts itself down.
We write to send our imagination ahead of us, sweeping words into a great story, forceful enough to uproot trees, lining the runway as our poems take off into blacklit clouds.
So we open the doors together, let hinges creak, speak, not to silence desire, but to unleash it, to loosen the grip of our lives on our souls.
Filling our skins with listening, we turn our poems into shared treasure, a sort of currency, like big wallets full of joy, there for us to spend.
And
yeah,
that's why we write.
But also because we can't not write.
That's an amazing poem. I have not heard it before. Excuse me, Kate, may I borrow this? So it says, we open the doors together, let the hinges creak, speak, not to silent desire, but to unleash it and to loosen the grip of our lives on our souls. Is there any more wonderful thing that one can do for someone who's incarcerated? Did you notice this happening? Did you sense that this amazing transformation?
I think the way we all think of it is that we are just providing the environment and the opportunity. And
they were ready.
They were ready. They took to it. They really, in general, have a great need to be listened to be heard. And we were just lucky enough to be able to be there when that happened for them. And they learned to listen to each other, some better than others. And you could see the relief. I think the best way to think of it is that we laughed a lot, and that's how safe the environment was.
Yes.
That in between these very dark and heavy poems, we could all laugh together.
I would say, we go every other Saturday. And I think we're up to 230 sessions.
Something, yeah.
We've been going for over 9 years, as you mentioned. And it's on my calendar in ink. It's one I don't lose because I realize that I get so much out of being there. And as Margie said, it's a level playing ground. I mean, we are all, quote, on the same page. And sometimes we'll write a group poem and we're all on the same page. But it's a place to be taken seriously and also laugh.
Several of the guys have mentioned to me that this is the first time someone's actually listened to what they have to say.
That's what I wondered.
And they had this feeling that before that there was nothing that they could do with their emotions. Now there was something they could do with it. Instead of hitting somebody, they could put it on a piece of paper. And it became a very powerful, for some of these guys, a very powerful way to do things. For me, this also became a community.
Yes.
This is, the we, they kind of started to drop out for me, and I think for all of us, that this is just a community that we enjoyed being in.
And that's exactly what the mission of the Ocean State Poets is,
Right.
is to provide a voice to people that don't have a voice.
Exactly.
And is also an ear to people that don't have someone to listen to them. And so that's really what it's all about for us, I think, out there.
As I was preparing for this week, I kept thinking about being in a cell and then getting told it's lunchtime, it's dinner time, it's cleanup time, it's outside exercise time, no talking, keep moving. And I'm thinking about the difference that a poet, or that poetry, this option, this workshop, would give to these people who hadn't been maybe listened to in their young lives, maybe not in their teen lives or adult lives, and now certainly we're not in prison. And how do we ever expect people to normalize if they have not had the experience of safe interchange?
Yeah, and something kind of miraculous happened because the group changed over the years.
Yes.
People came and went, and people were released and came back. But when you have a poetry workshop that's really working inside the prison or outside, it has its own kind of life. And we created an atmosphere, all of us together, that transcended, so that when new people came, they felt completely open to speak. They felt welcomed.
Yeah.
And that was really thrilling to see. It didn't take people long to get relaxed and to understand how we operated.
So word of mouth spread word about you all. How about another poem? How about one that you've written yourselves that talks about your experience?
This is actually from the point of view of one of our poet friends in the prison. It's called A Small Hope. The years have grown as thick as walls around his heart. Youngness is gone, long turned over into something else, his sentence. The angry song going on as if forever, and the lights too bright, and the smells of stress and fear that penetrate the concrete, like the sound of doors clanging shut, the unguarded elements of loss and restriction. But he does not give in. He keeps something open, finds the quiet he needs to survive. With his hands in his pockets, he breathes in the chill of the yard and believes his exhale reaches the world. His soul has softened into a small flower that he can see in the dark. His will, his practice keeps him sane. He refuses to be who they say he is. And when he dreams, sometimes there is a moment of hope and he is back home.
Whoa.
Love
That is beautiful, Margie.
you.
Thank you. And it is what we were just talking about, the difference between their exterior life and what's going on inside.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how they felt about you all. Did they talk about you and what you've done? Did they?
I do want to answer that question, but I just want to piggyback on something that you said that or were implying that within the group, and they're in prison, we're all in a prison setting, somehow in that hour and a half or so, they have found freedom. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge thing for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that they got that pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And they respond to that in a very, very positive way, that now they can really say something. And it doesn't have to be censored, and they can really talk and really put something together that is really reflects how they feel.
And I think also, when, to answer that question, Margie did a lot of work with URI and folks outside, and brought a lot of students in at one point. And so we had, remember that
Yes, sure.
wonderful event, and chime in, because I was just blown away by it. So the poets who were inmates had written beautiful poetry, and the poets who were in the student group that came also wrote poetry, and so we flipped, and prison poets read the poetry of the students, and the students read the poetry of, remember that?
And I would say that they were all really appreciative. That
Yes.
the guys were often expressing to us how much it meant to them, and we were constantly saying, well, it means just as much to us. But the students and the prisoners, that was a really amazing interaction, because they were both so pleased to have that opportunity. That was a wonderful thing.
To read their poems, but also afterward when they mingled and met
Yes.
and
Yeah.
shared that experience of what it was like to
Yeah.
hear your poem from somebody so different.
Yes.
That was
We
a
hear
wonderful
from-
meeting.
We hear from other inmates, too, who work in the area, that they have a good sense that they're hearing good things about our group, and that we're providing a service to them. Sometimes we doubt that we're providing a service, and they'll reinforce us and say, no, you guys are really doing something that's worthwhile to you.
Yeah, they'll frequently thank us just
Yeah.
for coming in.
That's
But
wonderful.
sometimes it
Yeah.
seems like too much fun.
Okay, Larry's going to read now. Larry.
All right, good.
After a prison visit. Here is the testimony of parishioners in the community of silent men, men whose voices cannot be received by those whose ears cannot hear, men whose tongues were severed as retribution by the unloved, men whose cries for forgiveness fall upon those immunized against tears, men whose reach is to those unable to respond from life in the shallows, men whose dignity and grace cannot be sensed by those laden with guilt. Here is the testimony of all these ones who cannot perceive themselves as beings, men whose mouths are sealed by their rancid fears, men whose hearts know only their lone tune, men whose prayers are fettered in their isolation, men whose death is a sole possession in their disowned life, men whose every move is mere calculation in their unseen performance. And here we sit, after a prison visit, wondering whom is the silenced and who the wandering saint.
That's very beautiful. I think you somehow voiced what the society needs to start saying, didn't you?
Yeah.
These are human beings who have very deep feelings, who have very deep past, who long to not be so isolated.
Exactly, yes.
Kate, how about you? I want to keep moving so we get
Sure.
everybody in.
This poem actually is not quite the same as my colleagues here, but it was my realization one time that I woke up one day feeling depressed, and I thought, how must it be like to wake up in prison every day and know that this is as far as you get for a long time? And so, we were thinking about bringing poems to the prison, and I wanted to bring something that had some sense to it, some sensory stuff to it. And so I brought herbs. I was allowed to bring herbs in, and this is the poem that kicked that off. It's called Take as Needed. I open my eyes as to a dark forest and pale to my bed with a dread heavy cover. I am immobile except for breath, so I inhale. Terror moves slowly as it too wakes up, startled. Shredded pieces of dreams slough off slowly, old skin after a bad burn. When pinpricks of sunlight filter through leaves, the air becomes luminous with dust motes. Bees and bugs show up, humming hymns. I dress up my humanity with sunrise and laugh myself out of the shadows. There's a garden outside. It could be considered full of failure for what did not grow or ripen. But then I saw how rogue sunflowers took over the tomato plant's turf, as though saying, "Excuse me, stuff is supposed to be happening here." And let me point out, this plot is excessive with herbs and flowers. I make a potion of this. I mix together what has won me over in the daylight, the fresh aroma of basil, the light touch of dill, the colors of the zinnia and marigold. Watching you fix that leaking hose, move broken items to the pot shed, prepare the grill for the meal. Before closing my eyes this evening, I will arm the nightstand with a vase full of green and yellow, orange and opportunity. Gratitude to you for the way you savored the basil.
People come together, they'd have no idea what is going to be unearthed when they come together in this kind of situation. Did any of the men feel that they had emotions that were too strong to be dealt with there? Did they find in themselves new feelings that they hadn't allowed themselves to feel before?
It is interesting. That really varied. And some men started out really wanting us to understand their crime, how long they'd been there, their past, because what we learned very early on is that usually people do bad things for a lot of reasons, many having to do with a hard childhood.
Many have had bad things happen to them.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
But others were not as open, and that was completely okay in our group. But you could see a sort of opening, I think, in some of them. Don't you think, Kate? You could feel them almost like tangibly opening over the weeks.
And I think it's almost like a little domino effect, you
Yes.
know, that somebody felt free enough to say, oh my God, okay, and we didn't get blown away. You know, we don't mind the language, we don't mind, you know, whatever comes up, and it's honored.
Yeah, it's all acceptable, and they accept it, and they start accepting themselves. And,
Right.
Yeah.
We rarely saw prison behaviors or stereotypical prison behaviors.
Yes.
Maybe one time I remember somebody making a joke about somebody who had written a poem and there was some tears shed. But it wasn't us. The guys kind of looked at him and sort of put him in his place. So it's like, we don't do that here. This is an open place. We don't judge people because they're feeling emotional or expressing emotion or showing emotion.
That's true.
So do you think that's what's outside of that room?
I'm certain to some degree it is.
Yeah.
We've always thought that the correctional officers and the prisoners often feel that they can't show vulnerability. So they're all sort of in this environment.
You know what's happening too? We're hearing that some of the poets we have in this current group are practicing their poetry with their cellmates.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
We're getting feedback.
Well, so that says that you do have a ripple effect here already. When these people get out of prison, they're going to have a stigma on them that you know isn't there, that you know could be oversighted or at least ignored or at least buried at some point. What would you say could be done about that stigma in our society now? It seems to me that all we have to hear is prisoner and we say, wait a minute, I'm not protected because we're all so fearful. We've built a society of fear right now, which we did not have, at least when I was growing up. And so how do we get that fear to look at the humane side?
Well, I think there needs to be a change in the culture about people who do break the laws in our society, and to not. The sentencing is very heavy in this country, and there is an emphasis on retribution rather than actually correcting.
Rehabilitation.
Rehab, and I would love to see more services for these people, and more of an emphasis on rehab, that these people are worth rehabilitating.
And these people will be coming back into society. There's almost nobody that we see, at least, that's not coming back. I mean, some people do get life without the potential, without the possibility of parole. That happens. but it's so rare. So they're coming back, and they're coming back sooner than people think, even with serious things like murder and that sort of thing. So I think we really have to start integrating people back into society in some way. The men are so isolated in so many ways. I mean, they have they don't know what some of them don't know what a smartphone is. They've never seen one, or any of that. Social media is not something that's available to them. Not that that's necessarily a good thing. Computer skills are non-existent at the ACI. They're not taught. That people don't have access to those kinds of skills. So you get more, and the longer you stay there, the more and more you're entering a world that you're not going to recognize in any way, shape, or form. And that integration has to happen.
Well,
That's
you're
not
helping with
justice.
that. Could you, I really believe you have helped with that for those men. I want you to read your poem, Bill, and then we have one more poem after that.
Okay, this is a poem that was published in a collection by myself. How did that happen?
Dude.
It's, I should probably explain a little bit about it. It's called Zoetrope, and Zoetrope is an ancient system of kind of the first moving pictures that were seen in those spindles that would spin, and you'd look through a slot and you'd see a moving image in there. This is Zoetrope, but from the other side, men looking out, because when you look at the medium security facility or the medium security facility, it looks like it. There are very thin slits that are the windows these guys have out on the world. They look like the old archery slits you see in medieval castles. So it's kind of like, so I was using that image to capture their view of the world, so Zoetrope. From vertical windows cut in prison cells, men observe the spinning earth. Nothing like the child's toy that first captured motion, the waddle of penguins, the gallop of horses. Theirs is an inverted carousel, a fenestration of slits, narrow slices of view, a constricted observatory from which to postulate a world, a single star, a sliver of sunset, a rare confluence of animals, a passing alignment of planets, a blue moon rising, a ball field where a home run was hit. They are the forgotten ones inside the Zoetrope, looking out as time passes at scenes that animate hope, one frame at a time. The observations were observations that men made, that the men in the prison in our group made. The idea of seeing a rare confluence of animals. I mean, somebody saw 2 or 3 animals at one time in the yard, and that kind of thing, or a passing alignment of planets. So these guys are literally trying to see the world we see in our more spectral view, through these narrow slits. And
It's a very powerful image. We have only about 1 minute left. So Margie, would you like to finish with this
Unless we want to,
poem?
if you have any questions instead.
Well, I do think, what would you do if you could do something? We have 1 minute.
More services for
More
these
services.
guys, especially the ones who are exiting. I would love to see them get coaching or some kind of support system as they're exiting, and it would be wonderful, a la Bill's comments, it would be wonderful for their
I think
And
the
more
same-
interaction, more interaction between the inside and the outside.
definitely.
And more interaction between one another, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to see family visits facilitated and encouraged, and another look at the sentencing guidelines.
Yes, sentencing. Thank you for watching. Obviously, we've opened a can of worms. We hope that you will look at the prison system and see if you might be willing to help, or if somebody you know is helping, to you support them. Thank you, Ocean State Poets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margie,
Yeah.
Larry,
Thank you so much.
Delightful.
Kate, and Bill. Thank you so much. God bless, and keep watching Good News Rhode Island. You'll hear good things.